Dr. Ruth Taylor will speak with best-selling mystery author Alyssa Maxwell, whose pen name is Alyssa Maxwell. They'll discuss Lisa's research process and how she translates historical facts into historical fiction. Alyssa Maxwell is the author of the Gilded Newport Mysteries and A Lady and a Lady's Maid Mysteries. She has worked in publishing as a reference book editor, ghostwriter, and fiction editor, but she knew from an early age that she wanted to be an author. Growing up in New England and traveling to Great Britain fueled a passion for history, while a love of puzzles drew her to the mystery genre. She and her husband make their home in South Florida. She's a member of the Mystery Writers of America, the Florida Romance Writers, and Sisters in Crime. Now, without any further delay, I'd like to present Ruth Taylor and Alyssa Maxwell.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi,
Welcome.
Ruth. Thank you so much for having me.
It's our pleasure. So you have quite a number of books written in Newport. What brought you to Newport and made you decide to make it a setting?
Oh my gosh, we're going to go back a lot of years. My first ever trip to Newport was to visit a friend who had just moved there. And I didn't know it at the time, but they were renting a house on the Point that was one of the newly restored Newport Restoration Foundation houses. I only came to appreciate that much, much later, really once I started my series. But, that got me going to Newport. And it was interesting because I got to see Newport from a more of an insider's point of view than a tourist, because they live there year round. But they were transplants. So when I met my husband, who had been born and raised there, had been there, his family had been there for generations. Now I began to see Newport as, from a real insider's point of view, a Newporter's point of view. And I learned a lot about what the average Newporter, what they valued, how they lived their lives. I like to say that there are two kinds of research. There's intentional research that we do when we get books and we comb the internet and things like that. And then there's accidental research. Well, I didn't know all those decades ago that I was doing accidental research for what would eventually become the Gilded Newport Mysteries. And that would make me able to put an authenticity, at least I hope I do, into the books. So that they don't feel like they're being written by somebody who is, really doesn't have the knowledge of what Newport is all about beyond the international aspect of it and the glitz and the glamour and the sailing and all of that, because the Newport I got to know was very different from that. My in-laws were not sailors. They didn't have a yacht. They didn't live in a Newport cottage. When they lived on the Point, it was very different from the Point we know today. They weren't living there anymore. Once I met my husband, they had moved. But yeah, when they lived in the Point, it was a very, I don't want to say poor neighborhood, but it was a very working class neighborhood in those days. Everybody knew each other, which was a wonderful thing for them. And I remember sitting around my in-laws' dinner table and hearing them talk about their day, where they would bring up so many different people that they knew, and they always caught up on who was doing what, who had a baby, who's getting married, who's in the hospital, all of that stuff. And I really feel that's where I got my initial insight on, what Newport was all about.
Yeah, Newport is a city with all of a city's everything, but it is a very small town at the same time.
It's cities. What do they say? It's 5 or 7 cities.
This is the Thornton Wilder,
right.
the Seven Circles of Newport. Yes, you're echoing him very lovely in a lovely way tonight. So you decided you'd start writing these mysteries in Newport. How did you decide on what you wanted to focus on? They're all mansion-based.
Yes, they are. I knew I wanted to write historicals because that's what I love to read. And that's what I had actually been writing before I became Alyssa Maxwell. I had been writing historical romances. But when I thought about, setting something in Newport, first of all, Newport is just a fabulous place to set murder mysteries because there are so many aspects of the city, so many little nooks and crannies.
So many
and
places to find a
waiting around.
corpse.
What's that? I'm sorry.
So many places to find a corpse.
Exactly, exactly. And not only that, but because it's an island, it really lends itself to the cozy mystery. I don't want to say formula, but you know, that type of book, because it's in a cozy mystery, you have a limited surroundings and a tight community where most people tend to know each other. And you can't just hop off and go away. You know, when you're on an island, especially in the 1890s, you couldn't just get up and leave. You know, you had to check the ferry schedule, or if you were going north, you could take, you know, the occasional trains. But anyway, the reason for the mansions is because I wanted to do something that would be instantly recognizable, not just to Newporters, but to everyone from all over the country. And honestly, the most identifiable thing about Newport is the Gilded Age and those mansions. And I thought, you know, when people arrive in a car, they get off a cruise, what is the first thing they do? Usually they go to the breakers. So I knew I was going to set my first book at the breakers, that we'd have Murder at the Breakers. And starting it in 1895 was perfect because that was the year the breakers opened. And they had their first grand ball. It was a housewarming ball and a coming out ball for Gertrude Vanderbilt.
So when I read Murder at the Breakers, your knowledge of the Vanderbilt family seemed almost intimate. Talk to us a little bit about how you do your research.
Well, especially when I begin a new series, I do like to get stacks of books from wherever I can find them, whether it be the library or used bookstores. And believe it or not, I found some books on Newport and the Vanderbilts right here in Florida at a used bookstore. Pretty much, you know, the information is out there. It's not that hard to find information about the Gilded Age, about, you know, these people, that the industrialists. But the more I read, the more I began to feel that I not only knew them, but liked them. Despite, yes, I know the robber barons, they did some terrible things. They stepped on the backs of the, you know, their poor workers. You know, there was a lot of unfairness and a huge divide in society. But when you get right down to it, people like the Vanderbilts were a family, and they had the same kind of illness and angst and family disputes that the rest of us had. And I really did begin to see them as just a family after a while. And so I could write them from Emma's point of view as people she doesn't always approve of, yet she has deep affection for them. She considers them part of her family, and she values the things that they do for her. Sometimes she has to, you know, gently push some of their kindness away, whether it's, you know, Aunt Alice trying to get her married, or them trying to give her, you know, a new buggy, or you know, things that, the presents that she knows comes with a bit of a price, and that price is losing a piece of her independence. For everything she accepts, you know, she becomes a little bit more dependent. And for a single woman in those days, independence was very hard to come by. She happens to have it because she had her great aunt Sadie, who was a bit of a, you know, early suffragist, left her a house and just enough money to keep it up. And she works. She was inspired by Nellie Bly and has become a journalist. So she does have an income. But again, that independence is hard won, and it's very fragile, and it needs to be protected.
While I was reading Murder at the Breakers, the Gilded Age was on television, and this notion of, you know, these young women trying to actually become modern women in a very rigid system was resonant in both places. I know this is a lot of books ago, but when you thought about creating Emma, you were thinking about real women when you did this? She seems very real.
Yeah, oh, sure. Well, I mentioned Nellie Bly. Nellie Bly set precedents that had not done up until that time, like her around the world trip to beat Phileas Fogg's fictional record, and other things too. She was always a very active journalist. She had herself locked away in a madhouse, an insane asylum in New York for 10 days so that she could report on what was really going on there. So the
I
woman
did not
had
know
no
that.
fear.
I
Yes,
did not
yes.
know that.
Her editor knew, her editor at the World, the paper she wrote for, did know that she was doing this. But once she got inside, she was basically on her own until the end of those 10 days. And it was a bit of a task to get her out, for them to be able to vouch for her and convince the doctors that she's really not insane. She doesn't need to be here.
Wow.
But during those 10 days, she suffered, from cold and lack of good food and, lack of hygiene. It was harrowing. So you can imagine the average woman did not do things like that. So, I found the precedent, but anytime Emma does something that crosses a line socially between the sexes, she acknowledges it. She doesn't blithely go breaking society's rules. She understands what those rules are. She knows that they apply to her. Yes, they can be broken, but there will be consequences. And we saw that in, oh my gosh, I don't remember which book, but she will go to the reading room, the Newport Reading Room, which was that exclusive men's club. It's still there on Bellevue
Still
Avenue.
is. Still is.
Yeah, okay, I thought it
Still
was.
is.
And walked to the front door, knocked on it. Now, in those days, most women would have crossed the street so as not to walk too close to it, because even walking on the sidewalk was a bit of a bold action for a genteel woman. So Emma has to face some real consequences. She went to talk to a suspect, but yeah, the consequences are swift and severe for crossing that line.
Do you think at all about your sort of ideal reader, the person to whom you are writing when you do these books?
To be honest, I don't think too much about who will be reading the books. When you're writing, you really have to be inside your own characters' heads. If you think too much about who's going to be reading what, you might become a little self-conscious, a little bit constrained. I think it's just better to forget all that and just let your characters develop and grow and do the things that, when they're acting in character, sometimes the author feels, well, I'm not even guiding them anymore. They're guiding themselves because this is how they are and this is what they would do in any given situation. But, having said that, I will admit that especially when the first book came out, I worried about how they would be accepted or not accepted in Newport, among Newport readers, among the Preservation Society, because I've used so many of their houses. I've used other houses as well, but I've used a lot of the Preservation Society houses. And yeah, it was a worry, but the response so far has been wonderful. I couldn't be more gratified with how people have received them.
We were laughing a bit at our museum shop because, we stock all the books, but the only one we sell out regularly is Murder at the Breakers.
Sure.
And it sort of ties into the fact that when most people go see a mansion, they go see the Breakers. Right. So,
right.
As
and
you
it's
say,
the first book.
It is the first.
And it's the first book.
I'm going to ask you a question I've always wanted to ask someone who writes a long series, which is, do you get bored of your main character?
No, I have not yet. No, I love coming back to Emma. I feel like, I get to be Emma now. Or if it's with my lady and Lady's Maid Mysteries, I enjoy going back to that little fictional town I've created in the Cotswolds in England. So no, so far, I haven't become bored with them. It becomes a little more challenging to think of fresh ways to murder people. And I do like to keep that, fairly fresh. I think things like guns and knives might come in later on in a secondary killing, but I've tried to keep every first murder that inciting incident for the plot has been different every time. And that has really been a lot of fun. And of course, I get to explore a new house and a new family with every book. So that's a new challenge and a new experience for me. And I've learned things that I didn't know, and I've been places through this series that I might not have gone otherwise, or might not have explored through books and research. So that's been fun and interesting, and that keeps me going.
Can you think offhand of something that you learned about Newport that you did not know going in as you did this series? It's
Gosh.
okay.
Well, first of all, how many of the houses are gone was it's really shocking to me.
Yeah.
And how many we almost lost, except for, last minute saves. Also the amount of people and the amount of the 400 members of the 400, which was society's elite, did come there every summer. I didn't realize that there were so many of them there all summer long in their own houses, that these houses didn't even have guest rooms in some cases, because your guests didn't have to stay over. They had their own cottage. But a lot of what I've learned from my husband, just going around with him, meeting people. His father was quite a photographer in his youth, and so we have mountains of photographs from the 40s and before that from his my husband's grandfather. So we have a lot of records, a lot of history of not only the family, but how they interacted with their friends and neighbors.
I have to say, I have to just take a moment to plug the Historical Society. Would love to see those photos. We have a massive photo collection.
Will, yes. You know what? Then I will arrange for you and my husband to talk, because
Yes,
he's got
please.
so much. Yes, he would be delighted.
So you mentioned that you like to kill the person off in a different way every time. Do you have other rules for yourself as you start to structure a plot?
Let's see. I like to start usually with the normal world. So, Emma's going about her business. That's a very good question, because I'm not the kind of writer. I do make a synopsis, but I don't necessarily do it in the kind of steps that would say, well, now this has to happen, now that has to happen. It more evolves through the characters, who they are, how they react to things, how they're proactive, in the face of what happens. So I would say no, it's kind of almost an organic process. And somehow I just try to get those highs and lows to kind of balance themselves out. I wish I wish I could say I had a method and every book. It makes it more of a challenge for me to not have that. But so it's really character driven.
So do you always know who the murderer was when you sit down to start to write?
I don't.
That's wonderful. Do talk more about that.
Usually have a clear idea who the victim is going to be. But I have written books where I've changed the murderer halfway through.
Wow.
Because I realized, this is a better twist. And in fact, that was the case in Murder at the Breakers. And honestly, not sure I remember who was supposed to be the murderer in that one, but the person it turns out I thought was much more fun. But this is something that is common to a lot of mystery authors. We talk about this. We say, I'm halfway through the book. I'm still not sure which one of my suspects I want to be the actual murderer. And that's because we make everybody look guilty of something. And everybody has something real to hide during the book that they don't want anybody to find out. So they really all do start to look guilty. And that's why you can, change without having to go back and rewrite the whole book, because you've already laid out all these different little mini mysteries with each character, with each suspect.
So you're a member of a writers group and you all do a little peer counseling. Is that part of the process?
Do. Well, on Facebook, I'm a member of a group called Sleuths in Time. We all write historical mysteries and we cross promote. We have our own page where we like to post things that not always just about the books, but about interesting historical facts and that kind of thing. Let's see, we have Colleen Cambridge, who's also Colleen Gleason, and Victoria Hamilton, and Nancy Harriman. There's a bunch of us, and I hate to leave anybody out. Oh, Ashley Weavers is one of our members. So it really helps to have, we call it a lifeboat team. And it really helps to have those people in your, your working world. I also have a critique group. We haven't met in person in over 2 years. We may get back to it. And in that, we actually read each other's work and tell each other what's working, what isn't. And other eyes on your work is always a good thing, because sometimes we can't see it, the forest for the trees.
I think most writers have a best critic, often someone close to them, but a group is even better.
I don't let, not that I don't let, but my husband doesn't read my books when they're in progress. I don't know why. Even after so many books, I still have these strange, like, oh, I don't want you to see it yet, kind of responses. I still get nervous when I bring a new book to critique.
I'm
like,
sure.
Oh God, are they gonna like it? Yeah.
It's like stage fright.
It is a little bit, yeah.
So you are now working on 2 series at the same time. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and what complications that might provide you?
The biggest complication is writing 2 books a year. I do 6 months and 6 months. When I'm doing one, I don't think much about the other, except to maybe proof the final draft of the book I wrote previously in the other series. But I really keep them separate. So I don't have any trouble keeping my characters distinct, or, forgetting who was who, or the, what place happened where. One is set obviously here in this country. The other one is set in England in another time period. It's still historical, but it's just after World War I. So the things that they're going through are a bit different from, Emma's life. They're dealing with the after effects of the war on people's health and emotional well-being, and the economics of England at the time, and the social changes that are happening. Society was in much greater flux at that point than Emma experiences. Emma, the changes in society are happening, but they're more gradual, I would say. The world is becoming more modern, but in England at that time, things were really kind of chaotic after the war. Women couldn't find husbands anymore, of a certain age, because all the men died in the war. They came home maimed and were no longer able to support a family. So things like that. And yet, these are kind of dark themes, but the books are they still have a lightness to them. They're not serious mysteries, they're still the cozy format. That's something I really enjoy, is the cozy. That's what I enjoy reading.
Well, it certainly makes the book a fast read, a fast and easy read. You get sucked into this, as you say, this cozy world.
Glad to hear that.
So you had to do a whole different sphere of research for the second series. And do you ever use a research assistant? I'm reading Pauline Lowell's question from the
Would
chat.
anyone out there like the job? No, I don't.
Doesn't pay well, but it's wonderful.
Yeah, no. Well, my husband, and I have to thank Lisa Stewart, if you're out there. Lisa has helped me with some places in Newport. I believe it's in Murder at Wakehurst. Emma goes to Castle Hill for the first time. And I was surprised at how little there is about the house itself. I could find information about the owner, Alexander Agassiz, who was a scientist. But the layout of the house really eluded me. And I had been there years ago. I had brunch there one New Year's Day, and we'd been to lunch, and outside on the lawn. I love the drinks on the lawn, but I really hadn't been in such a long time that without Lisa's help, she drew me a map, she took me pictures. Without that, I probably would have had them go somewhere else, in a different house.
she was your field sleuth.
So absolutely, absolutely.
You know, sometimes we can help with stuff like that at the Historical Society too. Every once in a while we have interior photos. So what's the next book that's coming out?
Murder at Beacon Rock is coming out in August, and self-explanatory about where it takes place. I did actually hesitate on doing it because I know it's privately owned these days. I think for a time, wasn't it a venue for weddings and that kind of thing? I think it was some years ago, but now I know it's privately owned. And I thought, you know, that's someone's house. But, you know, when you go on the boat tours in the harbor, they point it out, everybody looks at it. It's got an interesting history with the Morgan family. Who are also Edward Morgan, the owner who had it built, was at one time a Commodore of the New York Yacht Club, and I brought yachting into that story. In fact, I brought the America's Cup yachting into that story. So, you know, I once I started that research, I was all in. I knew I had to do it at Beacon Rock.
I think it just changed hands recently, so.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, I'm interested to see, Beechwood was still under construction, or, you know, the refurbishment last time we were in Newport. I don't know if it's done yet. Also Belcourt should be finished, I think now. We saw it while it was still under, you know, the being redone. That was fascinating.
So you're not going to run out of. Go ahead.
I hope not. I haven't yet. Well, I am right now writing Murder at the Elms because it's 1901 finally, and that was the year the house opened. So yeah, there were still houses being built in my timeline. So, and I've also toyed with doing some of the ones that are gone because I think it would be interesting to bring some attention to that. You know, some of these treasures that used to stand on Bellevue Avenue and the Ocean Drive.
Yeah, Paul Miller, former curator at the Preservation Society, wrote a book called Lost Newport about some of those houses, and he has some documentation of them. Someone in the chat is asking about lost houses, and there's a Lost Houses 1 and 2, I think.
Oh, is there a second one? I have the one.
I believe there's another one, a second one that's come out.
Okay, well.
And one of Linda Tribuzzi tells us Beechwood is in fact still under construction.
It is, okay. Amazing. Wow. But it's amazing to me that they are able to recreate what was made in the Gilded Age. When we saw Belcourt, my husband and I aren't good at following rules. So instead of leaving after the tour, we wandered into the workroom, and the carpenter in there, a master craftsman. I mean, so much more than a carpenter. And he showed us some of the machinery that they were using to recreate the hinges and the doors and the trim, and what they were using was what they would have used, you know, over 100 years ago. And I thought that was just fabulous, because you think sometimes in this country, in this world, that kind of craftsmanship doesn't exist anymore, but it does.
Yeah, no,
that's when we want it.
Right, there are, and when there's a reason. I mean, one of the great things from my perspective about so many houses surviving in Newport is the need for that level of craftsmanship exists on a regular basis.
Right.
Since people are restoring their houses all the time. I also went off the beaten track at Belcourt and walked into the workroom.
Oh, good.
So you're not alone. So you do come back to Newport periodically.
We do. Well, before the pandemic, we came every year.
And you plan to resume now.
Plan to come back in the summer. Yes. Yeah. So really looking forward.
And you do a little scouting for the series when you're here, or is it just pleasure?
Oh, no. I definitely do my research. We see what we can see. One trip, I guess it was a few trips ago, we did the Fort Adams tour, which didn't exist when I first started coming to Newport. Now, don't tell anybody, but I actually did see the fort years ago.
Mm.
We took advantage of a hole in the fence. But the tour was fascinating. And I used a lot of the details in Murder at Ochre Court, I think it was. Emma Goes to the Fort. So there's nothing like learning details that you wouldn't necessarily know to research. You learn things because you don't always know what questions to ask. And that's where accidental research comes in, because you stumble upon these fantastic tidbits of information that can be utilized in a plot. And I love that. That's the most exciting thing to me.
I haven't gotten to the end of your series yet, but I'm thinking about Emma as an older woman. Is she going to keep solving mysteries?
I don't know that. Yeah, I haven't gotten that far ahead of myself yet.
Because I think it would be awesome.
It's an interesting proposition, though, isn't it? Or maybe leaving the series off somewhere in the Gilded Age and picking up later, say the 30s. I'm trying to think of how old she would be then.
There are some wonderful lighthearted books that have come out with middle-aged and even older women, and of various stripes, and of course, being of a certain age myself, I adore them. So I encourage you. The houses, the Foxworth Hall. I'm reading from the questions. This is Pauline Lowell. Foxworth Hall in the Ladies' Maid series, is that also a real house?
No, Foxwood Hall is completely fictional. That series is pure fiction, other than what's happening socially and economically in England. The information about the war and the aftermath. That's real, but the lives and the characters and the houses and even the town of Little Barlow is all fictional, which also made it fun. Because Newport, I can't fictionalize too much because I'll get caught up or called out on it. But yeah, no. So but it is modeled after houses that you will find in the Cotswolds, estates, and that distinctive Cotswold stone, and just the kind of the layout that they had, and the kinds of rooms that you would find in a country manor.
Someone asks, this is Claudia Thompson asks, do you include some of the African-American history of Newport in your mysteries? This is a less known but very vital part of Newport's history all the way through.
I know, I have not, and I should have. And I know that Newport had a thriving African-American community, as we saw in the Gilded Age series. New York, they also did.
Yes.
Yeah, I have not. I sometimes feel that to bring characters from a walk of life that isn't my own might lack authenticity on my part.
I think that's
but
fair.
It's something I've thought about. I've given a lot of thought to it, and it's not impossible. It's something I think I would talk to my editor about. It's okay if I do that.
Yeah, it definitely all the way through the resort period of Newport's history, there was a parallel African-American resort community as well, with their own institutions and activities. It's an interesting and less discussed part of our history. Right. I'm going to literally, unless there's something you'd like to say in conclusion of the formal part of this interview, I'm going to literally move to reading the questions from the chat. Right. But is there something you'd like to say to sort of wrap up about your work?
Only that I'm so delighted that people are continuing to read them and enjoy them, and I love to hear from people. That's so important. I love to know, what you feel about Emma and her life. Yeah.
Okay, I have some questions, but folks, by all means, keep typing them in and I will keep reading them. Carolina Kohler suggests that after Emma gets married, she might be a different kind of sleuth, which would be fun. When you write about the fictional life of actual real people, what do you base that on? You know, and that actually was one of my questions when I read Murder at the
Mhm.
Breakers as well.
Right. I try to learn as much about the real people as I can. I think you can feel the tension between Neely and his parents over Grace Wilson, the woman that he'll marry. And that's earlier I said they have their angst and their family disputes and all that. So even though I'm putting words in their mouth, I'm having them do actions that they obviously did not do. I try to keep them true to the people that I have learned about, to give them as much of a real personality as I can. And, in talking about Neely, I found him to be such a thoughtful kind of young man that I thought, of all the siblings, I think Emma would be the closest to Neely. And so I made that part of the stories. So yeah, I try to be respectful of these real characters, to treat them with respect and with like a well-rounded approach, so that we see their good sides and their bad sides, if they have one, and just to make them real people.
I think they were all very sympathetically drawn, and
But I'm glad.
Lizzie Heller asks, is Mamie Fish going to be a character again? You did her so well. And by the way, all of us who think about Newport history love Mamie Fish.
Oh, I know. That was a fun book to write. We see Mamie briefly in at least a couple of books. She's going to pop up. She pops up in Wakehurst, Murder at Wakehurst. But no, she doesn't have as big a role as she does in Murder at Crossways.
How do you choose the names of your fictional characters?
Oh boy. Sometimes I'll go through baby name books. I have a few in my library. Or I'll look at, lists of popular names in the Victorian age. And I choose according to what strikes my fancy for any particular character. You think about their characteristics, their walk of life, are they wealthy? Are they not? Are they a maid? Are they a debutante? So all that comes into play. But in the end, it's really just, it's kind of my inner ear,
Mm-hmm. And you want to choose a name that kind of reflects their character too,
right? Yes, exactly.
Any big picture advice for aspiring writers who want to write, or Sue Sumner asks, who want to write historical cozies?
I would say find something that you are really excited to write about. Again, like you said, do I get bored with the characters? Well, no, because I'm passionate about Newport. I'm passionate about the Gilded Age. So I think if you write something because you think it's going to be the next popular thing, but it's not something that you love, I think that can be reflected in the writing. Whereas if you write with all your enthusiasm and all your energy, I think that comes across on the page as well. And it will give your characters more life.
And I suspect find a writers group is part of that.
Oh, well, that's the practical. Okay, the more practical advice is join the Mystery Writers of America and your state chapter. And yes, find other writers. Yeah, I can't say enough about having other writers in your life, because nobody understands this endeavor like another writer does. Even your family might get it, they might be proud, but they don't really know what goes into it and what you go through on a daily basis. There are days when our fingers are just flying on the keyboards, and other days when we're smacking our heads on our keyboards. So there's a lot of up and downs.
I know that a lot of academics set themselves word goals for every day. Do you have to do that as well?
I do. It's not a huge, I tend to do anywhere from 5 to 7 pages a day. So whatever that translates into, like 15 or 1,200 to maybe 2,000 words a day.
Sounds very similar.
I do. I have to pace myself because, you know, I have 6 months. I've got to do the research and write the synopsis and then actually write the book in that time. So I can't just, you know, goof off for days on end. Although I don't write on the weekends. I know a lot of writers who write every day, but I like to have a life and kind of recharge. And the weekend's my time to do that. And that helps. That's helpful.
We have a couple of questions about Derek. Your readers seem quite fond of him. Would you talk to us about Derek a little bit?
Well, what do they want to know?
How did you create him? Who were you thinking of? Was there a model?
Well, you know, I have to admit that Murder with the Breakers being my first mystery, I think there was still a bit of a romance writer in me when I made Derek. Yeah, he's kind of that gentleman, that steady, dependable, brave, you know, always going to be there. And yet, okay, I have to say, in personally, I don't like the alpha male, the one who charges in and tells the woman he's going to save her and she has to do this and that so he can keep her safe. I don't like that guy. I like the guy who, with, you know, maybe a little persuasion, can admit that, you know what, you're pretty smart and you're self-reliant. I'm still going to be your backup, but I'm not going to get in your way and I'm not going to stop you from doing the things you feel you need to do. And I think I instilled that. I hope I instilled that in Derek, because Emma wouldn't be with any other kind of man.
I imagine others feel that way as well.
I would hope so.
Here's the next question, which I'm just going to add to a little bit. Who are your favorite authors and who do you most look up to? What authors do you most
gosh,
admire?
well, you know, there are so many authors, contemporary authors that I read. If I went down the list, I'll forget people, and I hate to do that. So I'm going to go back even further and say the authors that I kind of grew up on, you know, middle school and into high school, were people like Daphne du Maurier, who's not, you know, necessarily a mystery author, but she was a very atmospheric author. She did have moments in her books. Mary Stewart is another one. Again, very atmospheric. Her stories are very grounded in place, in, you know, that idea of setting as character, which I've tried to do with the Newport books. Going back, you know, this probably doesn't really inform my mystery writing, but I'm a huge Jane Austen fan from way, way back, and I reread those every few years. Let's see, gosh, you know, my mind always goes blank at this sort of question. I'm actually Shakespeare. I love, read a lot of Shakespeare in my youth. And I actually think that he teaches the reader a lot about human nature with both a serious and a comical way of looking at things. So, you know, it sounds like, oh, you can't even understand the language, but once you attune your ear to it, you really see that he was writing for everyone and had something to say to and about everyone.
Oh, I agree. By the way, to carry on, Ruth, who asked that question also, I love all your books.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so
Don't
much.
want you not to get that message. Any more questions, folks? Yes. Do you read other mystery authors who also write about the Gilded Age?
I have actually read more historical fiction set in the Gilded Age than other mysteries. A friend of mine was writing a series set actually she's writing a new series set in the Gilded Age, but in England. Her name's Clara McKenna, and her series takes an American heiress. So she's one of those $1 million, what they call it, the $1 million princess.
Buccaneers, yes.
Yeah, so her series, her name, did I say her name? Clara McKenna. It's the Stella and Lindy mysteries. And let's see, but I've been reading some Beatrice Williams with Lauren Willig, and my mind is going blank later in the Gilded Age. I also really enjoy some of the biographies. The Glitter and the Gold by Consuelo Vanderbilt was so interesting, and King Lear by Elizabeth Drexel Lear.
King Lear is an essential book to understand
Yes.
Newport society. I think.
Yeah. Oh, Edith Wharton, my goodness. I mean, yeah, House of Mirth is one of my favorite books. And I know everybody always says No Age of Innocence is, her masterpiece, but I am such a fan of, is it Lily Bart? Lily Bart, the main character in House of Mirth, I thought was so brilliant that, yeah. And in fact, Edith Wharton makes a showing in Murder at Rough Point. She's a
lovely,
very major secondary character in that book.
This may be our last question, and it isn't really a question, but I'll read it anyway. This is from Aggie Soleil. Just wanted to say thank you to all who organized this, also to Alyssa. I can't wait to see you in Newport this year with love.
Who is that?
Aggie.
Oh, Aggie. Hi, Aggie. Thank you so much for being here.
Another comment from Linda Trabuzio, as a former guide at the Breakers and love of Newport, I also appreciate these books.
Oh, thank you.
So I want to thank you so much for doing this. This was so much fun, and I'm working my way through the series. I can't wait to see you in Newport. I hope you'll think about a book signing for being here. And thank you, Lisa, for talking to us this afternoon, this evening. It was lovely.
Thank you, Ruth. It's been a pleasure.